Biggest political threat to the president of Belarus. But in this video, she's speaking from Lithuania.
Вы запугали диктатуру. Она дрожит от страха перед вами, вашей силой и мужеством.
She appeared here 2 days after the 9th of August election, which she denounced as rigged. The circumstances surrounding her departure from Belarus remain a mystery. The 37-year-old was thrown into the spotlight after her husband, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, was arrested in May. He's facing up to 12 years in jail for charges that rights groups say are politically motivated. After his arrest, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya registered to run as a presidential candidate in her husband's place and became the surprise wildcard of the election. She then began to receive threats and decided to send her children abroad for safety. She joined forces with Veronika Tsepkala, whose husband was barred from running and fled the country, and Maria Kolesnikova, the campaign manager for another candidate who was arrested. This photo of them became a symbolic image during the election, and the three women drew record crowds to their rallies. President Alexander Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years. His elections have never been seen as free and fair, but this is the first time there have been protests against the election result on such a large scale. Many Belarusians are fed up with the economic situation in the country, the level of corruption, and the fact that one man has been in power for so long. They have also voiced anger at the government's handling of coronavirus. Belarusians want greater democratic freedoms and began showing their support for opposition candidates ahead of the election. On election day, no independent observers from any Western countries were allowed to scrutinize the vote, just a small number from former Soviet nations. Irregularities were reported, and access to the internet was severely restricted for several days. Official results declared Mr. Lukashenko had won 80% of the vote. There were widespread reports of vote rigging, and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya refused to accept the results. She was forced to leave Belarus. Mass protests kicked off because people felt the election had been rigged. They were largely peaceful, but demonstrators were met with police brutality, and thousands were detained and tortured.
Сначала люди шли мирно, они шли сцепкой, устроили большую сцепку и начинали подъезжать просто автозаки параллельно дороге и забирать людей. Естественно, потом до столкновений доходило.
The initial protests have given way to a huge opposition movement, demanding new democratic leadership and economic reform. EU countries and the US have condemned the violence and showed support for the protesters. The European Union says it will impose sanctions on officials in Belarus involved in brutality, vote rigging and imprisoning protesters.
Our message is very clear. Stop the violence.
The president has so far refused to allow another vote, but in an unprecedented show of defiance, some factory workers, who are traditionally loyal, have turned against him. Mr. Lukashenko was heckled off stage at a tractor factory, and his helicopter was booed as it flew away. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has vowed to stand to the end in these protests, but said people voted for her as a symbol of hope for the opposition rather than to be the next leader of Belarus. She's promised new elections after her victory to elect a long-term leader of the country.